So this week I wanted to build some cubbies to go in the coat rack that I just finished last week. And initially I wanted to do something rustic with this old barn wood that my stepdad has. But after going through most of it, I realized it was pretty much unusable, and I've got too many scraps lying around my shop anyways. So I figured a good way to get rid of some of these scraps would be to actually use some of it. And I've got this pine left over from the coat rack project that I finished last week, and I figured that being that it's nice and lightweight, it would be good to make these cubbies out of, especially for the vertically challenged people like my wife that are actually going to have to reach up and pull these things off the shelf. The first thing I did was just lay out my boards and try to find what I thought was the best grain and make my marks so that I could rip each board down because they were all too wide. I didn't want these things to be too tall or too big inside the holes that they fit in. I ended up setting up a stop block on my miter saw, which worked out pretty good for making all the cross cuts for each piece. I had to change out my regular blade for my dado stack so that I could use my box joint jig, and I just got this thing a few months back, and it's a little pricey, but for what it does and the amount of adjustability you have with it and really the ease of use, I find it to be really nice to use, and it does a good job making the box joints as long as you get everything set up right and get all of your tolerances set, and make sure you make that first test cut with it and make sure your test piece fits together like you want it to before making your box. The one thing I can say about making these box joints is it can be a little bit boring because it's mostly a lot of just repetitive cutting, and I tried to take my time on each piece and slowly cut them because you get blowout, especially with this pine if you're not careful. And I made sure I moved my backer board so I had a good backer piece behind it, and it seemed to be pretty much as long as you moved slow and took your time. I didn't really have much of any tear out on these, so that seemed to work pretty good. I like to try fit each piece together just to make sure that they all fit good, and you can see it seems to go together pretty well. The next thing that I had to do was cut a dado in the bottom, and I actually had to set up a couple of stops so that I could make a stop dado in the two side pieces so you wouldn't be able to see the slot for the dado once the box was put together. And of course I had to change back to my regular table saw blade here so that I could rip the hardboard down to the right width and then take it over to my miter saw and cross cut each piece to fit in the bottom of the box. You can see it sort of made a U shape in the side piece on the dado, and initially I thought that I could hand sand the corners off, and after doing that for a few minutes I realized that was no fun, so I took it over to the belt sander, and after checking each piece and resanding it about 40 times I actually got it to fit in there pretty nice. Gluing up finger joints always seems to be a pretty hectic job because you're trying to get glue spread on each one of these fingers before the wood starts to swell up and you have trouble actually getting the box to go together. So this time I just used a piece of scrap wood I had laying around to spread the glue, and I used tape on the insides to try to minimize the amount of squeeze out so I wouldn't have a bunch of glue to clean out of the inside corners plus get glue all over the bottom piece of hardboard that I had in my box. And the tape really seemed to help quite a bit because as soon as I got each one of these put together I was able to peel the tape off before the glue got set up, and most of it came out. I just had a little bit to wipe out at the end, and then it's pretty much just two clamps. These were pretty small boxes, so they were pretty easy to clamp up. Then it's time to unclamp each box and start the fun process of sanding. And after a few minutes of sanding these things while trying to hold them, I figured out I could actually clamp these to my crosscut table, and that helped sanding the edges of them quite a bit. I ended up putting some peel and stick sandpaper on the top of my table saw top to flatten the bottoms out, and that seemed to work pretty well. This was the first time that I've actually used wipe on poly on a project, and I found it really easy to use, and it does a good job of just bringing out the natural colors in the wood. And after putting the first coat on, I lightly sanded and ended up putting 2 coats on each box, and that seemed to be pretty much adequate. He's in there. Put him in there. All right. Good job. As always, guys, happy trails, and thanks for watching.